right. Hello, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome Walid Saleh in this talk. I hardly need to introduce him, I think. Walid is probably the biggest scholar on Quranic exegesis right now. He's published so many important works on the history of tafsir and also the historiography of tafsir, which is also relevant, I think, to a lot of his research and has had a big impact on the research of a lot of other people. Actually, Peter Coppens this week is a guest on Tweeting Historians, and he has tweeted on the influence Walid Saleh had on his own work on Al-Qasimi. So this just shows how important his work is. And I'm really glad he's presenting some of it today, namely on tafsir and royalty, which is a very exciting topic. And yeah, welcome, Walid. Very glad to have you here, and very glad also that Scott Rees from Northern Arizona University was willing to act as his discussant. He's also working on a lot of issues related to transnational or transregional Muslim networks and publishing. So I hope this will be an interesting event and an interesting discussion. So Walid, welcome. Tafsir and royalty.
Yeah.
Oh, one more thing, sorry, I nearly forgot. Seeing what happened in Lebanon, everybody is just trying to find out how they can support the country or the people who are suffering from this. So if anybody is looking for an option to do so, I will post a link in the chat, and you can just have a look at it and decide what you do with it, but just to offer a small sign of support. So sorry, I forgot to say it earlier, but now Walid, please go ahead.
Thank you, Hannah, and yeah, I really, we all send our love to Lebanon, and hopefully they will recover soon. I will read like a small presentation, and then we'll be moving to a power slide also, as I said. So I'd like to thank you, Hannah, and Majid. Hello, Majid, for organizing this series and for inviting me. And I'm honored and thrilled to be joining you. I also want to thank my respondent, Scott, thank you, and the colleagues who are attending this meeting. Now, the two most famous cases of political authority determining the course of Quranic studies is, of course, the famous Egyptian royal edition of 1924 and the recent King Fahd edition of 1984. In 1982, the late King Fahd of Saudi Arabia laid the foundation stone for the King Fahd complex for the printing of the Quran in Medina. 2 years later, he was there in person to inaugurate the plant, and soon the newly named Quran of Medina was being printed or produced. Millions of copies were printed and shipped all over the Islamic world to be distributed for free this time. The campaign was universal in its reach, and its stated aim to make the Quran available to all Muslims was undoubtedly true. But there was also, no doubt, political gain to be had, namely the spreading of the influence and reach of the religious establishment of Saudi Arabia. Now, the event has signaled a transition of religious power. The triumph of Medina over Al-Azhar was, it seems, now complete. Truth be told, however, the printing of the Saudi royal edition was, in my opinion, just a symbolic event. It did not change much on the ground, for already the supremacy of Salafi Islam was all but complete. Al-Azhar was itself almost barely distinguishable from Medina now. That it was a symbolic act, it's clear from the fact that this new edition hardly changed anything in the old royal Egyptian edition. The publication of the Saudi royal edition simply capped a century of development that saw the shifting of religious power from the old cosmopolitan imperial centers to new ones, or newly refashioned centers, let me say. Ironically, in a sense, it did not matter who published the Quran anymore, rather who gets to interpret it, or who gets to claim the authority to interpret it, and who manages to garner the most authoritative voice for their interpretation. This interpretive prerogative is ultimately the clearest indication of religious authority, in my opinion. The King Fahd Quran was the last act in the replacement of exegetical authority that started in the late 19th century and triumphed in the 20th century. A new hermeneutical paradigm emerged, and replaced the old Ash'ari Sunni paradigm that reigned for almost 800 years. It's of course no surprise to discover that royalty by its nature was in the habit of producing official editions of the Quran, or for that matter, scripture in general. It would be naive to expect political authority to be uninterested in religious authority. But beyond the publication of the Quran, royalty and other forms of pseudo-royalty in the Middle East had a great influence in Quranic studies, and in this case, tafsir in particular. So in a sense, I want to show how the publication efforts supported by royal houses really was determinant in the history. Now, the impetus behind my research into the history of the book in tafsir, when and by whom was a particular Quran commentary published, was due to my investigation of one of the most momentous of religious transformation in the Islamic world. This was the demise of the Baydawi tafsir and the consensus work that united all Muslims over the meaning of the Quran, in this case, Sunni Muslims. It was replaced by a new hadith-centered Salafi hermeneutics that I called radical hermeneutics. Now, the old Ash'ari Sunni paradigm of hermeneutics, where philology and rhetoric were at the center of the method, was replaced by one where hadith and the voice of the first 3 generations were given supremacy. The story of this radical, complete transformation has been the subject of my interest for the past 15 years now. How did a work that dominated the madrasa and the curriculum for over 4 centuries, from the beginning of the 10th century Hijrah, 900 Hijrah, lose its grip, and how did the Ibn Kathir tafsir replace it, was the story that I was interested in. Invariably, I was led to ask cultural questions, such as why was a particular medieval Quran commentary published at this particular moment in history? Only then did I start asking the question, who was responsible for its publication? Instead of the usual questions we ask, who edited the work, what manuscript did they use, and is the edition reliable for academic work or scholarly work? So what started as a strictly medievally oriented scholarly investigation on my part, basically that you have to look at all editions so that you determine which one is the reliable one for your work, became a way of shedding light on the history of developments in the modern period in the debates on the Quran. Soon I came to realize that the history of the publication of these works was an integral part of the history of tafsir itself, since publication was the most visible trace of the religious struggle going on in the 19th and early 20th century regarding the question on how to interpret and who gets to interpret the Quran. Now, the first result of this research was the publication of, in 2010, almost a decade ago, of my article, Preliminary Remarks on the Historiography of Tafsir, with the subtitle, A History of the Book Approach in the Journal of Quranic Studies. Now, this was the history of the book approach.
Walid, you should probably share your screen.
Yeah, so let me do the slides. Where's share screen? Here it is. And there we go. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so this was like the article where I really laid out my understanding of how the history of publication is intimately related to how we study tafsir. Now, there are several conclusions that I have so far established since the publication till now. The first is that the 19th century history of publication was a continuation of the hegemony of the madrasa seminary in the field of Quranic studies. The books published then were reflective of the hierarchy of authority was established in the madrasa system. The 19th century was still the Baydawi century in tafsir. All works published during this century were thus either connected directly to Baydawi or in its sphere of influence. Second is that all publishing houses were still imperial at the beginning of the century. Bulaq in Cairo and the Matba al-Ma'mura al-Sultaniya in Istanbul. All works published in these 2 printers were imperially sanctioned and supported. they have imperial sanction. The third conclusion is that we are still in the sphere of tafsir as hashia. The revolution to come in the early 20th century, where the hierarchy of text in tafsir was reshuffled and resulted in the complete disappearance of hashia, has not happened yet. Thus, the first work of tafsir published in the Islamic world is the Hashiyat Sheikh Zada in Bulaq in 1847. This was reissued in Istanbul in 1866. And let me show the slide. So this is the colophon for the Hashia of Sheikh Zada of the second edition. And I have underlined here in red what it's saying. So it first states you that it's exactly like the one in ببولاق مصر المحمية مطابقا طبعه في النسخ الصحيحة المطبوعة ببولاق مصر المحمية. Now this is published where in المطبعة المعمورة السلطانية الكائنة في القسطنطينية. And then it does mention the Sultan Abdul Aziz أدام الله عز الله ملة الإسلام بتأييد سلطنته. And then the ناظر المعارف المعمومية and مدير المطبعة السلطانية. So basically, we have really here a chain of authority that's clearly imperial and tells you it's sanctioned. Okay, now the colophon for the Istanbul edition makes clear that the official blessing for this work was obtained. Indeed, this work was the ultimate work of tafsir in the Ottoman Turkish lands. It was their preferred hashia on Baydawi. Now, 4 hashiyas were issued in this century, and they are already, and let me actually show you which ones they are. So this is the Baydawi 19th century editions. So you have the first one is the Sheikh Zada Bulaq, who have the honor of being issued twice from Bulaq, and the second one in Istanbul. The Hashiyat al-Qunawi, which is the largest work in tafsir ever published in the Islamic world, came out in 7 massive folio volumes in 1868. The third was Hashiyat al-Shihab Inayat al-Qadi that came out in Bulaq. By the way, these are all hashiyas on Baydawi. Now, then the fourth one is Hashiyat al-Siyah al-Kuti in Istanbul, which is early, 1854. Now, unlike Europe, which saw the publication of Baydawi in 1844 by Fleischer and issued a Baydawi alone with no hashia, Muslims read tafsir through the hashia. Now, the last hashia to be published on Baydawi came in 1911, which really heralds the end of hashia publication. This is al-Kazaruni. Now, the fourth conclusion is that any work in the genre of tafsir that was not part of the Anwar tradition was not published by the religious establishment in the 19th century, and that's up to 1873. So basically, anything that published in the 19th century that is not part of Baydawi can be explained, but it usually doesn't have what I would call imperial sanction. So it was an Orientalist who saw the publication of Zamakhshari al-Kashaf in India in 1856. Moreover, the publication of Al-Razi Mafatih al-Ghaib was single-handedly directed by the great Rifa' al-Tahtawi as part of his Arab awakening, and this happened in 1872. Now let me show you. This is the non-Baydawi works that came out in the 19th century. Now, number 3, Abu Saud, is actually a Baydawi thing, but I'll come back to that. The publication for Abu Saud, Quran commentary, actually fits the Baydawi pattern, for he was in the Zamakhshari Baydawi tradition. Now, when the Muslims finally decided to print other works of tafsir that were not part of Anwar gloss tradition, it was because of a major cultural shift and the rise of a new hermeneutical paradigm that would have radical consequences for how the Quran was interpreted. It's here that we start seeing the impact of royalties in the history of tafsir, and that the works they will publish will radically shift the nature of tafsir and the works of tafsir available. Now, the publication in 1873 of Fath al-Bayan fi Maqasid al-Quran by the Indian scholar / prince Muhammad Siddiq Khan heralded a new age in the hermeneutics of the Quran in the modern era. This now forgotten work has an introduction that called for an activation of the hermeneutical theory of Ibn Taymiyyah and raised the status of Ibn Kathir's Quran commentary. This, in my opinion, was the beginning of the end of an-Anwar, of the end of the Ash'arite dominance in tafsir. The reform Salafi movement started to pay attention to tafsir and would soon dominate the hermeneutical discourse, culminating in what I've called a radical hermeneutics, where the legacy of hadith and the interpretations of the early 3 generations of Muslims were seen as the only legitimate path to the meaning of the Quran. Now, the first edition of Fath al-Bayan was issued in Bhopal in India in 10 volumes. So I don't have it here. Oh, there it is, number 4. Fath al-Bayan in Bhopal, India, 1873. Then in Cairo, 1877, with Ibn Kathir. Okay. Now, when it was reissued in Cairo in 1876 in 4 volumes in Bulaq print, it had the Quran commentary of Ibn Kathir on the margins. This was the first edition of Ibn Kathir that I know of. The coupling of these 2 works points to a conscious and purposeful publishing program that was now redirecting what Muslims would read and publish of the medieval corpus of tafsir. This was happening at the same time as the Arab awakening, Nahda, and its own search for classics in every discipline, including tafsir. A search that had no place for the gloss in its academic horizon. Arab nationalists wanted Tabari and Al-Qurtubi. Glosses in tafsir ceased to be published after the state or around the state. What we have is a window from 1847 to 1890 when Muslim published Qasas and Anwar, and this was considered the peak in the genre. Okay, now the 1905 publication of Tabari, there it is, can you see this? This is the 1905 publication of Tabari, was a momentous moment in this transformation. This publication was the direct result of the Al-Rashid of Najd sending their personal copy to Cairo. Now, the end of the page, it has a tanbih, and here it is. طبع تفسير ابن جرير على النسخة المحضرة من خزالة أمراء نجد آل رشيد. And then the praise, لا زالت الأيام تتلألأ, etc. It's soon that we start seeing distant royalties paying for the publications of out of the canon works that were not part of the madrasa curriculum or Baydawi centered. Now, nothing matches the Sultan of Morocco in this regard, Mawlaya Abdul Hafiz, who paid for the publication of the massive Al-Bahr al-Muhit in 8 large volumes. And here it is. Now, this is the colophon for the Bahr al-Muhit of Abu Hayyan, paid by Mawlaya Abdul Aziz. You see the middle, السلطان الأعظم والمليك الأجل الأكرم مولاي عبد الحفيظ ابن مولاي السلطان حسن خلد الله ملكه ما توالى الزمن, etc., etc. Right? Now, the reign of this sultan was anything if not tumultuous, and money was scarce. As a matter of fact, it's a marvel that he managed to send money to Cairo to pay for such massive, by the way, this is a massive Quran commentary, 8 Bulaq volumes. That he could find the time and the money to look after this publication is a marvel. It also betrays a knowledge of the tradition that is profoundly complex. Now, perhaps the most fateful of interventions in the history of tafsir is the publication of Rashid Rida of Ibn Kathir work by money from the new king in Saudi Arabia, Abdul Aziz Al Saud. Now, by the way, this was before the discovery of oil and before he had even conquered Hijaz, which he did in 1925. The publication came in 1924. Now, he paid for a sumptuous 9-volume edition of Ibn Kathir with Ma'alim al-Baghawi down. There we go. So you see the bottom page. طبع على نفقة صاحب الجلالة السعودية ومحيي السنة المحمدية الإمام عبد العزيز آل سعود ملك الحجاز. I can't see it because of the وسلطان نجد وملحقاتها. الطبعة الأولى سنة 1334 which is really 1924. Now, this was a turning point work in the presentation of tafsir work. Now, not only this is like, you know, like a sumptuous edition, but also the mise en page looked like a modern work and no more like a bulaq edition, which mimicked manuscript layout. So let me show you. So this is the mise en page of Rashid Rida edition. The Quran citation is underlined, it's paragraphed. Basically, it looks like any modern work we would see. Now, let me show you. This is how Al-Bahr al-Muhit edition Bulaq looks. There is no paragraphing, no telling you where, like the number of a verse, etc. No headlines. The hawashi is massive, etc., etc. So you could see that the mise en page radically changes with this 1924 edition. And I'm claiming that that this transformation is culturally significant. So this was a turning point work in the presentation of a tafsir work. The mise en page looked like a modern work and no more like a Bulaq edition. And by now, Bulaq, as a printing house, has lost its grip on publication, and we have a long history of independent houses entering the fray. It's soon that we have a roaring reaction from the Khedives of Egypt. For not only they saw the publication of the Quran, but they will soon bless and support the publication of what remains the most luxurious of all Quran commentaries of the 20th century, the 20-volume work of Al-Qurtubi. To me, this was a direct response for an encroachment of non-Ash'ari Salafi powers into the publication history of tafsir. The publication of this work in 1933 shows the degree to which rulers were aware of tafsir as a tool for religious authority. Now let me show you. This is the Quran commentary of Qurtubi, first royal edition. And you could see the Malik al-Mu'azzam Fuad al-Awwal, Malik Masr. It mentions that he published the Quran al-Sharif, etc. And then in the second paragraph, it highlights الجامع لأحكام القرآن, دائع الشهرة بين علماء المسلمين الإسلام, دار الكتب المصرية. So this is an official publication, and then it does mention فؤاد الأول and صاحب الجلالة فؤاد الأول والأمير فاروق, the ولي العهد. Okay. Now, the royal Moroccan family, which, by the way, is fascinating from far away in Morocco. They're sending money and influencing the debate. The royal Moroccan family continued its support and patronage of publishing what they considered their patrimony of tafsir. So in a sense, Abu Hayyan was considered by them, because he is a Ghornati, is like a Moroccan patrimonial heritage. What would happen is the massive Quran commentary of Ibn Atiyah, an Andalusian medieval Muslim commentator and the author of an important Quran commentary that was overlooked till a royal commission started publishing it in 1974 onwards. It took 17 years to publish in massive 15 volumes. Now, the royals seeing to the publications were the King Hassan Thani of Morocco and the Prince Khalifa bin Hamad Al Thani of Qatar. So here we are. This is the introduction of King Hassan and Al Khalifa Thani, and you could see ولقد التقت رغبة صاحب السمو الشيخ خليفة بن آمن حمد آل ثاني أمير دولة قطر ورغبة أخيه حضرة صاحب الجلالة الملك حسن الثاني, etc. And they want to present us with a gift, and they paid for this publication. Now, the introduction to this edition was more or less a manifesto of sort, a reflection on the identity of modern Muslims and a justification for the interests of things medieval on the part of the royal dignitaries. Now, it's unfortunate that the King of Morocco was never asked more directly about this particular project. But he, the King of Morocco, was known for his knowledge of the tradition and used to moderate lessons on the Quran exegesis on the television during the month of Ramadan, sitting amidst tomes of Quran commentary for all to see. It's clear to him there was a direct connection between Quran exegesis, legitimacy of his rule, and the proper interpretation of Islam. And here I am really referring to Schiffenfeld's study of this event. Now, this royal patronage continues. And the most important reference work in tafsir, the Fihris al-Makhtutat, was published by a research house of the Royal Jordanian family. So if you have a look here, الفهرس الشامل للتراث العربي الإسلامي المخطوط علوم مخطوطات القرآن is really مؤسسة آل البيت المجمع الملكي للبحوث والحضارات مؤسسة آل البيت. Now this is really was a project by the Royal Prince Hassan of Jordan. Now they also paid and keep the most important tafsir center portal, tafsir.com. Now, the complex history of tafsir in the modern times was predicated on a major cultural struggle between Salafism and traditionalism. The new history we are presented in tafsir is impossible, I am presenting, to untangle unless we chart a history of the book approach of the genre in the late 20th and late 19th and early 20th century. And this shift was impossible without these interventions. Now let me show you this last slide that shows you the continuation of publication history of what happened. So you have Ibn Kathir as standalone in 1884. You have a Durr al-Manthur in 1896. You have Al Saud edition of Ibn Kathir Baghawi in 24. We have Al-Qurtubi, Taba al-Ula, it's not 35, it's 33 actually. And then comes really the Muqaddimah fi Usul Tafsir in 36. And then there is the very important Manahil al-Urfan al-Zirqani between 36 to 40. And then Al-Khuli in 1940, his Tafsir Ma'alim Hayatihi. And then Al-Dhahabi in 1946. Goldzier comes in Arabic by the translation of Ali Hassan Abdul Qadir in 1944. Ibn Ashur of Tunisia, the Mufti of Tunisia, Al-Fadil in 1966. Al-Nahu wa Kutub Tafsir in 1982. And then Al-Fihris Shamil Al-Bayt in 1987. Thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing for the time being.
Yeah, thank you, Walid. So now we're going to have a short conversation on this, and then Scott will give his input, which I'm very much looking forward to. I've been wondering, well, I mean, you've talked about tafsir exclusively now. How was this related to the printing and publication of other genres of Islamic scholarship? Like, for example, the advances in layout that you mentioned, having headers, having paragraphs, etc. Did this happen in tafsir after it happened in other genres? And if so, why was tafsir so late?
Yeah, it did. So I think already the publishing of other belles-lettres work was paragraphed and punctuated and referenced. So tafsir, in a sense, came a bit late. Now, what I see my work doing is basically putting the information out there and make it available so that we can make more connections. Now, I'm not aware when the mise en page of Arabic books changes. I've been searching, but I have never had like pinpointed one work that shows like the desertion of the Bulaq manuscript look print to what we would call a better. Now, I would bet that the Bible edition of the Protestants might be the first mise en page change in Arabic books, but I might be wrong. The truth of the matter is that I'm not aware of any study that speaks about this shift.
Yeah.
What I want to say is that by making tafsir readable in that sense, it opened it to the lay person in ways that was not possible with the Bulaq prints.
Yeah, even I mean, when I go to our institute's library, we have some old prints of the Jalalain and Baydawi, etc., and I'm lost because, yeah, they don't even give you
they're
verse
unusable
numbers or surah numbers or anything. So basically, they assume that you know the Quran by heart, so you can just.
But you're supposed to know them already, so you know that's cheating to put them in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So and do you think that royals were particularly interested in tafsir, or was it just one of the many things they did? I mean, did they produce like fiqh, etc., or was tafsir like particularly prestigious? Or
well, so I've been trying to answer this question, and I have like a longer version of this research. I stipulated that with Abu Saud in Istanbul, we have a shift in the connection between royalty and tafsir. And the introduction of Abu Saud speaks of royal patronage directly. And I think what you have in the publication history is this continuation. So now you have Abu Saud mentioning royal patronage, but you have also Al-Alusi in Baghdad directly connecting his work to royal patronage and request. And I think the interest of royalty in tafsir is a continuation in that line. Now, in the case of Mawlaya Mawlaya Abdul Hafid, he was a marvel. He published at least up to 60 books paid for. Some of them, 2 of them were tafsir works. Now, I would bet that Abu Hayyan al-Gharnati's 8-volume is the biggest project he paid for. I could be wrong, but I would bet on it. I just started studying him and his activities. Now, they were interested in other works, but I think, I'm trying to, in a sense, put this history on the table so that we can make sense of what was going on. Like, I didn't know, for example, that Al-Qurtubi was directly connected to Al-Khidaiwis, nor did, Al-Saud and Ibn Kathir. I mean, the fact that Al-Saud and Ibn Kathir are directly connected in 1924 does tell you that this is profoundly significant to them, right? And to send it to Rashid Rida. I mean, you couldn't find a more significant players connected on one page. Al-Saud, Rashid Rida, and Ibn Kathir so early in the history of the century.
Do we have any non-royal, like, governments?
Yeah, so like I would say, Tahtawi's edition of Al-Razi is, in a sense, he needed the money from the Khidaiwis because it was published in the Bulaq. But I think he was the instigator, and in a sense, it was clear that he wanted, in a way, this masterwork to be on the table.
Okay, and in more recent years?
In more recent years, yeah, you have Al-Turki, who's a minister of oil, was it of oil? And he now supplies this money to reissues editions of tafsir. But also, to give you an example, like Al-Wahid al-Basid that came out from Saudi Arabia, one of the persons who really looked after it was a professor prince from Al Saud. So it does continue to be seen. Now, Qatar continues to publish tafsir. So they have reissued Ibn Atiyah, but they also reissued Tasheel. And recently, Jaizat Abu Dhabi lil Qur'an, they issued the first Hashia in 100 years, Al-Tibi. So I have more to say, but like I was more interested in the direct, clear story.
Sure. Do we have any sense whether this is a Sunni thing exclusively?
Oh, well, then I do here, in a sense, admit to my complete ignorance of publication history of Shi'i works, right? The only early edition that I know from Iran that is I'm aware of is the 1905 Rawz al-Bayan edition of al-Razi, Abu Bakr al-Razi, but I'm completely not aware of that history, so it's not my area of expertise. I am interested in a sense, in the Shi'i interest in Baydawi, which is deep, and that's something else. But of Shi'i tafsir and its publication history, I haven't really done much on it.
Okay, thank you. Then I would like to ask Scott now to add his thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. This is just an amazing amount of information and just incredibly rich. I had trouble keeping up, taking notes, in fact. And a couple of things stuck out at me. One is I was wondering if you could talk about the kind of imperial patronage of this is also a factor of economics, as you pointed out. These are just incredibly expensive works to put out because they're multi-volume, and you mentioned that it's kind of amazing that Sultan Morocco actually was able to come up with a dosh for this. So in some ways, is what's the connection between this and not only ideology but the economics of it? Something else I was wondering about that is about the idea of patronage. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about the Tabari edition and who the patrons were, because I noticed that it's Maimoniya Press, which is just part of Halabi, which is, and interestingly enough, they're very closely connected to Al-Azhar through this period, through personal connections. And again, so there's this element of the personal that I think also comes into this, and so I think in that sense, I'm really heartened by the fact that both you and Ahmed are beginning to look at publishing as also about these history of personalities as much as anything, in a lot of ways, and how people actualize their own ideologies.
God, we are having a bit of trouble understanding you. I don't know.
Oh, you can't hear? Is that better?
Not very.
Is that better now?
A bit. Yeah, it's a bit better.
Is that better now? Okay, it's sometimes if I just take one bud out, it's a problem. Did you get that, Walid, what I was saying?
Yeah, I did. So you see, like when I started working on this, like was, I think 20 years ago, the first time I saw this Al Saud connection to Ibn Kathir, I thought I noted it, and I thought it's an oddity. Then you have, now we have two early editions of Tabari, one with one based on the copy of the Khudayzi. The other one is the two copies, right? But we don't have a narrative. We don't have a narrative. So like Ahmed al-Shamsi is the first to, in a sense, to try and give us narratives of the Musahhihs and Islam Da'i. Musahhihs, who is doing this work. Now, they do have colophons at the end, and they give you the names of this. I think and the next step is to, in a sense, have a who is who of the Musahhihs and the ones who really were behind the scenes doing all that. But so in a sense, this is a multifaceted work. What I see myself doing is just covering the tafsir history of it. Like, to give you an example, if you look at one of my slides, I have Az-Zurqani, Manahil al-Arfan al-Zurqani. Now, I spent hours trying to establish the bibliographical date of its publication. I could only come with a window. It was published between 1936 or 1940. Beyond that, I cannot tell you when it was published exactly. That's because there seems to be, like, I mean, an impossibility in the record, but it has to have been published that early. And that's what we need to establish is basically when, who, like for example, I always was puzzled as why Al-Razi was published this early in the middle of the 19th century. And like, because it didn't fit really, till I realized that it was Tahtawi, then it all made sense. In a sense, Tahtawi was outside Madrasa, and he published that. So then the narrative that I say that the 19th century is a Baydawi century still holds. And up till 1873, when Muhammad Siddiq Khan comes with his money, he is a prince, becomes a prince, he marries a princess. So he has money to do. And his is, to my mind, his is the first modern published work, in the sense it's published at the time that the author was still alive and he published it. I'm not aware of anything else published as such, meaning what we have of tafsir works were all dead and part of the madrasa tradition. His was the first modern author and then he published it on his own dime.
But actually, it's more like 90% of the text is Shawkani, so you could call it.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I mean,
it as his own work.
Yeah, but the introduction is what I find fascinating, right? Yeah.
Okay, but
but the other thing that I wanted to ask you about is, or comment on, is this introduction of, as you call it, the sort of modern format with paragraphs and punctuation and footnotes, etc. And I wanted to suggest that it's, instead of trying to look for kind of a tipping point where there's one text that really illustrates this, it may be more of an evolutionary process where people are experimenting with it. Because I've seen, and particularly again, Halabi books, there's one book, it's called Majmu' al-Mubarakah, and the first edition is printed in 1919, but then you have a later edition that is in the late 50s. And somebody at some point decided, well, this needed punctuation. So they start and actually you're talking about, Johanna, you were talking about it being confusing not to have the punctuation. I try it with a book where somebody's just thrown it in haphazardly. You say, oh, this is we're going to make this modern. We're going to put in punctuation. And there seems to be this almost haphazard approach to it. Like it's an experiment. So I'm wondering if what we need to look for is, rather than a tipping point, is look at this as an evolutionary process.
Yeah, I mean,
because again, because and Halabi, I mean, never does abandon this through the 1950s. This as you referred to the Bulak format, they never abandon it entirely. Yeah, you still have marginalia in printed editions.
I mean, even something like Tabari would not be, Halabi himself would not change from the old print till 1958, I think. I forgot the third Halabi edition, which became the standard edition of Tabari, right? That was basically a resetting and a re-editing with punctuation, with footnotes, with the verse numbers, with everything that you would want, in a sense, a book to be. But so even Tabari was not till 1958, I think. I forgot the date of the third edition, Halabi edition, yeah. Now, let me say this. If I'm gonna make a bet, I would say the Bible of 1860, of the Protestant edition in Beirut, would be, to me, like the first mise en page transformation, but I might be wrong. But we need a more closer cultural history of the Arabic book. Traits of the mise en page. Now, Ahmed and Islam might know more about this, but in tafsir, certainly, I could point to 1924 as the edition.
And fortunately, 2 weeks from now, Ahmed Shamsi will give a talk, and Islam Daya will be his discussant. So everybody who's interested, I invite them to join that session so we can talk more about the history of publishing in general. So Scott, did you want to say anything more?
No, I think I just want to
Okay, thank you.
just open it up.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you very much, Walid. That was very exciting, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions from the audience. So feel free to ask your questions either in the chat or by using the button for raising your hand. I will stop the recording now, but not before inviting you to join the upcoming talks. Well, next week it will be me, and I'll hopefully be sitting in a holiday home, and hopefully I'll have stable internet connection. So let's see how it works out. I'm going to try to talk about my research on the global spread of Ibn Kathir, which kind of ties in with Walid's talk very nicely, only I'm going to talk about a later stage. And then Ahmed Ash-Shamsi, as I just said, which also ties in very well with this topic concerning publishing. So thank you very much, and hope to see many of you next week or the week after or the sessions that follow.